You're listening and watching the Proud Muslim podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mahmood Qasim, who's the CEO of International Development and Relief Foundation, also known as IDRF, which happens to be the charity that I'm proud to say that I work for. Mahmood has been in the charity space for several years in different Islamic faith-inspired charity. His many years of experience in leadership has given him the ability to be incredibly effective in building highly autonomous and high-performance teams across the world. Having worked under Mahmood's leadership in two different organizations, I can comfortably say that no other leader has taught me as much as he has when it comes to what it truly means to lead. On this episode, Mahmood and I dove into several different definitions of what true leadership is, and we discussed why so many of us erroneously equate leadership with having formal authority, and how it's possible to also have no formal authority whatsoever and still be a true leader. According to Mahmood, true leadership is about servitude and empowerment, which is ultimately rooted in the prophetic model that is inspired by love and mercy. The reason why so many of us fail in leadership is because we try to manage people like we manage things. The issue with that model, however, is that people aren't things, so they shouldn't be managed or treated as commodities. In other words, people shouldn't be regarded as a means to an end, but an end in of itself. So if you're someone who is currently trying to develop your own leadership skills, I believe this podcast is definitely for you, and I certainly hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I have, and I hope you enjoy the show. Peace.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mahmood Qasim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Eduardo. How's it going, bro?
Eduardo, you say it with the Spanish accent. I
Gotta
love that.
try.
I'm really happy to have you over. Thank you for coming to the Proud Muslim podcast. As you know, this is a place where we try to empower our Muslim community to become leaders and to really rise to our full potential.
Yeah.
And the reason why I specifically wanted you on a podcast is because I've learned a lot from you. Extremely grateful to have the opportunity to work under your leadership in several different organizations. You're definitely somebody that taught me, the practical definition of leadership, not in theory, but also like real life.
I appreciate that.
I want this to be an honest conversation around how to build a high performance team, and how can we, to those listeners out there who wants to develop their leadership skills, how can we get them started and working in themselves and really understanding that you can start anywhere with whatever God-given resources you have. And also demystify a little bit, these kind of fallacious understanding of what being a leader is, because I think there's a lot of backward approaches to leadership.
Right.
Like some people think being a leader is being a boss. Like, I'm going to tell you what to do, and by default, by de facto, I'm a leader. No, right? And I'm going to be taking notes. Even if I don't have any notepad, I'm going to take them.
And you're recording it all, so you can go back and review
Best notes ever.
Yeah. No, first of all, really honored to be here, and I love the setup. I like what you've started. This is very much needed in our community. And when you have experience like this and you've worked in the field, you've been involved with the community, the best way is to share it and teach others and embark this knowledge to others. So it's really, really nice that you're doing this.
Thank you.
To really start off the topic, leadership is not a formula that you can just pick up from a book. I know there's a lot of theory behind leadership and there's a lot of books on leadership, but really the best way to learn it is to get involved. And people might ask themselves, am I automatically just going to be a leader, right? Is there's some formula or something that you can see in a person and just say, look, this person is going to be a natural leader? And personally, the opinion I take is it's trial and error. You're going to have to continue. It's a constant journey. So anybody who's looking into getting involved and always ask themselves this question, like, I don't see myself as someone who can lead. I can follow. Obviously, every leader needs followers to be a leader.
Yeah.
But at the same time, over time, as you practice, the more you're involved, the things that you do will build those characters in you to be able to lead people. And we see many, many examples of this. You look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you look at the Sahaba. Not every single person started off in a leadership capacity. There were followers at some point. They were following a leader who was inspiring them, that they were learning from. And my personal example is the same. I wasn't always a leader. I didn't always, start in positions of leadership. I started in very junior positions. I started as a volunteer. I worked my way and I learned certain skills and I implemented those in my next role. I implemented those in my community. Then I took on another step and I implemented those in other places. And over time, over practice, you start to get involved and put those leadership principles into practice.
Right. So you mentioned that there's not one recipe for leadership, but there's definitely, I think, definitions that we all personally gravitate towards and that we particularly like. So what is, in your definition, I think, the closest definition of leadership?
My personal philosophy on leadership, and I subscribe to this, and I've seen some inspirational leaders subscribe to this, is servant leadership. And if I was to describe that to people in 2 words, they'll understand it. Servant leadership. If you really want to lead people, you have to serve. You have to be there to serve them first and foremost. And you look at a lot of leadership coaches and trainers and so on. One of them, which I love, and I've shared this with you multiple times, is Simon Sinek. And, he talks about leadership is not about being in charge, right? It's about those that are in your charge. So if you're going to lead people, you have to roll up your sleeves. You have to lead from the front. You have to show and demonstrate that you are going to do the things that you're asking others to do. And that's exactly what you see from many of the Sahaba and Prophet ﷺ himself.
Right.
When he's asking others to give, he's the first to give. When he's asking the Sahaba to get into the front lines, he's getting into the front lines. He's not just in the back sitting on a throne. And neither should us leaders who want to make a change just sit back, put the theory out there, and have others push that agenda forward. So my definition and definition of many leaders who people look up to, they will see them being in the service of others.
That's beautiful. And subhanAllah, what you say sounds like common sense, but we oftentimes see this deprecated model of people just, shouting orders and thinking that it's going to work. Where do you think that comes from? That's fallacious understanding of leadership.
If you look at the corporate structure that we work in, a lot of people have a manager mindset. Right. They're always managing things, managing tasks, managing people. And they get very much into task specifics, micro involved. And they're not looking at the element of inspiration and guidance, which is what a lot of leadership is about. It's not about doing the work or knowing how to do the work. It's about taking the best potential out of people and having them push forward and do it. Look at some amazing inspirational leaders. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Prophet ﷺ.
Awesome.
What are some of the things that stand out? They're able to be part of the change, but they also inspire change. They motivate others to follow what they have. And, my personal example, being young, having mentors and coaches and shuyukh and mashayikh who you look up to, and you look at them and you see them doing things in practice and you say, I want to be like this. And then you listen to their motivation and you're moved, your heart's touched. So you really push yourself to want to do those things. And that's why we're always reading autobiographies. We're reading about different people and the life struggles and the things that they've gone through, because it inspires you to really move that direction forward.
So is it fair to say that people follow leaders not because of the leaders, they follow the leaders because of how the leaders make them feel and how the leaders actually contribute to them and their own growth and empowerment, and how they treat them as an end in and of itself and not a means to an end?
I think there's multiple factors, but that's definitely a key one. The leader has to lead by example. They can't be talking something and walking something else.
Right.
You see a lot of leaders who fall apart is because, people are able to see that talk is cheap. What I'm hearing from your mouth is very different than your actions. But those leaders who you see, they are able to take a vision or an end goal that they want an entire following to come towards, and they're able to really move the masses and get them behind that. And a lot of times, how do they get them behind that? They lead from the front. They push forward. They show the direction. They're able to get people to come out of their comfort zones and get them to get behind that.
That's very interesting. So one thing I wanted to personally ask you, and one of the things that I find particularly difficult sometimes in leadership is that, you want to be a servant, but you also want to make people understand that you're there to serve, but not do the job for people, right? So what is the best way to motivate someone who is motivated? Can you motivate someone who's not motivated?
Well,
Is
that's
that a fair
the whole
question?
point. That's the whole point of motivation. Sometimes
Right.
people lose the energy. And there's an example, may Allah continue to bless him, Sheikh Tawfiq, who
Ameen.
I've worked with, I've been around. And he gave us this really beautiful example. He's like, look, there are times, and we have a cup of coffee right here. There are times where you as a vessel, beautiful cup of coffee, and you've added 2 spoons of sugar in there.
Right.
You really don't feel the sweetness of that sugar until you pick up that spoon, stir it, and then you drink it. So a lot of times there are like, look at COVID as a situation. People are getting a little bit demotivated. They're feeling a bit boxed in. They can't go out. So their energy levels may not be the same. They might have lost that motivation like they used to have.
Right.
But it just requires someone who can get out there, motivate that energy back, stir that soul a little bit, get that sugar moving again, so they're back to their optimal self.
That's beautiful.
And leadership does require that. You will, as a leader, always need to understand the emotional well-being of the people around you. You have to get involved and understand them, their families, what are their ticking points. And many of the great leaders don't focus on the tasks that have to be done. They're more so focused on the person. Because if the person is at their optimal performance and they're really connected, their mental psyche is in the right place, you can really make sure the tasks will get done. The majority of the people can get work done. That's why you have them on your teams or in your volunteer circles. But sometimes that energy is gone, and you just got to stir that up a little bit.
I remember once being invited to halaqa to speak about leadership, and I asked the youth if they thought that anybody could be a leader. And it was interesting to see that the vast majority of the crowd didn't raise their hand to think that everybody can be a leader. And I felt like it was a bit devastating, to be honest, because we talk often about, the sunnah of like growing the beard, or the sunnah of like, eating with the right hand, or just following the way of the Prophet ﷺ. But we don't oftentimes encourage, I think, at least as far as my experience goes, the sunnah of becoming a leader. The Prophet ﷺ was a leader, and he was introverted. I think it's fair to say. So what is your take on that? Do you think that everybody can be a leader? And if no, why? And if yes, why?
I would say it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Not everybody needs to be a leader. Like the Prophet is a great example you give. We are his followers, right? He gave us a message. He came with a message, but not all of us have to be the exact same. Right? We can take an approach on some of the things that we do by being followers. If you have someone who's got a great vision, a great message, and you subscribe to that, then become a follower. You don't have to always be the one to say, I have to lead this.
Right.
So, but there's the other side to it, where people will push back and say, no, I don't want to get involved because sooner or later I'll be asked to get into leadership and run this whole thing. You should aspire to that, because if somebody can identify that in you and they see those qualities in you and they're pushing you a little bit out of your comfort zones, you should be willing to step forward and develop yourself. Personal development should always be our goal. We should never step back and say, I'm comfortable with where I am. I like where I am. We have to push ourselves. We have to continue getting better and better in our work, in our personal lives, in our understanding of our deen. And anytime we become idle, that's when we start to lose that drive and the energy and the motivation.
One of the things that I think this is kind of making me realize by listening to your talk is that there's many different definitions of what leadership is. When I think about leadership, I oftentimes like to think of my mother, who kind of raised me as a single parent. And she was never on the limelight or on the spotlight. I remember we used to walk on the street and she would just pick up like trash and put it in the garbage. And I saw that as leadership being manifested in its most beautiful forms. It's just essentially about being, true to who you are and doing good and standing for something. You know what I mean? And I think also going back to what you said, you can't be a leader if you're not a follower. So sometimes even the best followers are the best leaders because they're actually teaching other people how to lead and being the best followers. So there's many, different layers of leadership. What do you think that our community right now needs in terms of leadership? Do you think we should have more bigger than life type of leaders, or leaders who lead from the back, or a little bit of both? Because I think there's benefit in both. Like even, for example, in multimedia, you have power in front of the camera and you also have power behind a camera.
Right.
What do you think is the right balance?
I think for our community, we're at a very interesting crossroads here in the West. And you're seeing generations that have, been born here, raised here. This is home. This is their country. And for us, we have to start looking at how do we become more involved in the system, as well as make change through the skills that we have, be it in media or in our corporate sector, or in finance, or in the nonprofit space. We should not just sit back and play the victim card and be the mindset that we're going through difficult times, so I'm just going to wait till this passes and then I'll figure out what to do. We have to be part of that change. And I think a lot of our community and the younger generations, they have to think about getting involved in those institutions. There's this mindset in a lot of our youth and even older, young adults, that the community centers, the masajid, and the Islamic institutions are all run by this uncle mentality, uncle mindset.
Right.
And it's generational. There's differences in their approaches. But if we don't get involved, then you're going to let the infrastructure deteriorate. Things are going to fall apart. Yes, you have to put up with the politics sometimes to be involved in those circles. But if you bring something to the table and you feel like you can be part of the change, that's what you have to do. Even from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if you see something that you don't feel liking towards, the first thing you're supposed to do is what? Change it with your hand. If you can't change it with your hand, you change it with your words. You speak against it. And if you can't do that, then you hate it in your heart. It's that approach. We do the other way around. We'll just hate it. We'll talk against it, but we won't do anything to get involved in changing it.
We condemn the darkness, but we don't shed a light.
Exactly.
Right.
So, my belief is we have a strong generation of young Muslim professionals. We have bright thinkers. We have people who are engaged in the political system, but you have to be part of the change. Too many times we play passive. We stay back. We don't speak up. We don't get involved. We have bright ideas, but we just let them stay at the stage of ideas. We don't actually action them out. So I feel like it is a transition happening. You and I, both young, we're involved. We're taking part in the change because we believe in it. And there are many who might listen to this who have great ideas, great potential, but they're just sitting back on it. And my advice to them would be they have to act upon it. The best way to learn and develop further leadership skills is you might fail at the first attempt. You might fail at the second attempt. But all of those are learnings and how to make sure you reach that end objective, and you'll improve at it.
Now, I have a very specific question for you, and take some time to think about it if you need to. I know you're quick on your toes, but is there a particular moment in your life where you were struck by somebody who really manifested the epitome of what it means to be a leader? And if you can describe that.
Wow, that's a deep one. There's different elements that I can look at it from.
I was thinking about like my mom. Remember when I told you her picking up a garbage and putting it on the can. Yeah. But is there a moment in your life, particularly like where you were struck and you're like, wow, this is it?
I would say my father, he really made some interesting decisions, which I would have thought back then, why are we doing this? Like, it makes no sense to just, and I'll share the story with you. While we were young, we lived in a city called Newmarket. It's kind of 40, 50 kilometers north of Toronto. I know we're in Montreal now, so a bit distance from here.
Right.
But the decision that my father took to take us from a small town that's not that multicultural, we did our high school there, to move us to Mississauga, which is, a multicultural, lots of diverse backgrounds, lots of community, and got us involved without us really, more like voluntold, to get us involved in community work and pushing us to take some steps forward. Being young in your early 13, 14, just getting into high school, you're not thinking about volunteering or getting involved in your mosque or community center. But my father had that foresight, and he was looking forward to what potential do my children have?
Right.
If they're just right now spending their time in studies and sports, that's all they're doing. Do they have something else to offer? And he saw that. And that was a turning point in my life because I got exposed to some great leaders, people who took me under their arms. They were my coach, murabbis, in a sense that, from day to night, if I was going through something, I can turn to them. My group of friends, my circle, my circle of influence became better. And many of the brothers who I was surrounded by in those 5, 10, 15 years that I've grown up with them, we've all taken on different positions of leadership.
Mashallah.
Some are running one organization, some are running other organizations. And all in all of that came down to a decision that my father took. And that takes a lot of leadership. You're picking up your family and moving to a new town. But he had that wisdom and the thought process of 5, 10 years ahead.
Going through the discomfort of changing the environment and
picking up, leaving his work, picking it up, moving, and then saying, this is what my kids need and the future needs. And back then, you're probably like, this is just horrible. My friends are changing. I don't want to be in this environment. But sometimes leaders have to make tough decisions.
Right.
And, the father and the mother in the household, you're a father, you have to sometimes make tough choices.
Yeah.
Your son might cry and not like it.
Yeah.
But that's leadership.
And he tells you, I don't want to play with you anymore, Daddy. Yeah. I'm not your friend anymore.
So I think that was a turning point. And
beautiful.
Throughout the journey, those early people who were part of my life have continued to stay a part of my life.
Interesting. So this kind of reminds me, going back to Simon Sinek, and where he speaks about the model of the parent as being the greatest example of what leadership is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that both of us kind of subscribed to, the idea that our parents are the kind of epitome of what leadership is, because it's completely in line with what he says. And I think one of the things we can all agree on is that the basis in which parents lead is with love.
Right.
And even if sometimes what they do or say is unpopular, they'll still do it at the detriment of being disliked temporarily for the greater benefit. That being said, do you think that it's possible to be a leader without necessarily loving, the folks that you're leading?
You have to love. You have to have that attachment with the people that are following you. Because if you're just going to be detached...
So there is no leadership without love, basically.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a dictator style leader, then you're instilling fear. But as soon as you're gone, I'm sure they're going to be happy. Oh my God, he's finally gone, or she's finally gone. And some might say, oh, I miss, this and that and the other. In my experience, I've found you might love someone, but you sometimes have to say some things they may dislike. And they may not love you or respect you to the same level at that moment. But a little while later, your son, your child as an example, they come back to you. Because the norm is that you're in a state of love. You're in a state of acceptance. You're in a state of coaching and guidance.
You want the best for
But there are times where a decision may be taken that from your experience, from your, being involved in it in a while, that this is not going to end well. So they may dislike you during that period, but then they come back around to you. And, an example I can give is you get upset with your child. Do they run from you when they're crying, or do they run to you when they're crying?
Interesting.
Most of the time, they might be upset, they cry, but they'll run to you. They might fall in your lap and throw a tantrum. But if it was fear, they'd want to get away from you. But this is that fear with love attached to it. They come to you. Similarly, when you're leading teams, you're giving some harsh criticism or feedback. I wouldn't use the word criticism.
Right.
You're giving some feedback, and the person you're giving it to, if it's very subjective, you're just picking on them and you're not really sticking to the issue, then they might start to say, why is this person getting so personal with me, and that has nothing to do with my work, and they might get disattached from you. But if it's very objective and you're giving them the guidance and the coaching and walking them through why you feel this is better for them, and that's going to help them grow further, they might take that pill, have a hard time swallowing it at that time, but later they'll appreciate it. And I found with my experience over time, if you're really attached and you show interest with the people you serve, they will always turn to you for advice.
So I have another question concerning, the power of vulnerability when it comes to leadership. Now there's this movement that I think was started by Brené Brown and, Dare to Lead. And I read her book and I felt like it was interesting. Sometimes I think she pushes it too far. But I kind of noticed that there is real power in being vulnerable and in making yourself relatable and not always trying to be strong. You know, in the US, for example, they have this culture where the leadership cannot show weakness,
Right.
especially in the elections. You know, they like Trump lied about, you know, when he had COVID, he's like, I'm fine, but he was like super
Having a hard time breathing.
Yeah, exactly. What's your take on that? Do you think, where's the right balance? And do you think there should be a balance, or it should all be about being real, about your emotions and transparent about how you feel?
You know, I think, again, it comes down to circumstances. If you're a leader of a team, you look at, I'll use a sports analogy here. If you're leading a team, you're a basketball team, and you're in the finals and you're having your, you know, game 7, if I'm the captain of the team and I walk in with fear, then the people around me will start to feel like if our coach, if our leader, our captain is not confident, then they start to feel a bit, you know, jittery.
Right.
So circumstantially, you have to know when are the times you should be vulnerable, and when are the times you have to lead with that confidence and not show your fear. Because you may have spent months, you know, getting a message across, but when the time comes to deliver and you yourself are fearful, then everybody will ask the question, well, we've put so much time into this planning. Why is our leader feeling so shaky right now? Is something wrong? Like, they might start to doubt themselves. But being vulnerable is also extremely, extremely important. I think it's important for all leaders to know their weaknesses and surround themselves with people who complement that. I'm not perfect at everything. There's many areas I struggle in. And I found the best way to lead is to surround yourselves with people who will also magnify that leadership. And you have to be willing to share that responsibility. You're sitting in a circle, and we're taught this in Islam. If you don't know, say you don't know. Making it up or acting as if you know everything is never going to get you anywhere. So when I don't know something, I always tell the people around me as well, look, if you don't know, I'm not expecting you to, you know, talk your way out of it and say, I'll figure this out. Just say you don't know. Maybe somebody else in that room or in that circle has the ability to share with you. When you're in a circle, like in your teams, what we call a safety box, you know, you have to feel safe with the people you're with to be vulnerable enough to share the areas you need to improve. And same applies in your families. You know, and a husband and wife know each other's strengths, and they also know the areas that need to be improved. But if it's looked at an angle of, or a lens of, well, they're horrible at these things and just completely ignore that, then you don't build on that relationship. Same applies to parenting. You know, everybody becomes a parent for the first time. You're not like an expert when you have your first kid, but you learn along the way, you experience things together. You may follow a certain style for 1 year, but you learn something and you adapt. And that has to be there. So vulnerability is important, and being open and transparent with the people around you. But when you're in a time of crunch, you have to be able to stand up, not have that fear, and really drive that direction forward.
Moving to another question, one of the things that I've noticed actually by observing how you lead that I find you're particularly good at, especially in this time and age where it's very sometimes difficult to disagree on the most minute of things, because it feels like society is becoming more and more polarized, and we sometimes even apologize for disagreeing. It's like, oh, sorry, I don't agree. Like, why are you sorry? It's okay to disagree. You know, it's good to have multiple perspective. And
right.
I think people naturally say that because, you know, they don't want to create tension. And it's something that I've noticed you're really good in, you know, expressing disagreement or a different perspective without necessarily shutting down the other person or making them feel belittled.
Right.
And I've seen you do that, and I want to know what's the trick, because I'm particularly trying to work on that, but I find it very difficult sometimes, you know, when someone comes with an idea and you can tell that he has his heart and soul into the idea, but it's a terrible idea. And you don't want to crush that person by letting them know that it's kind of a stupid idea. So how do you go about it?
So I find that, you know, the first part of your question about how you know, don't kind of beat around the bush sort of situation.
Yeah.
And the second part focusing on if some creative juices are flowing, but the idea is not so great. For the first one, I have this philosophy: say what you mean and mean what you say. In a lot of the things you find now with some of the younger generations, the millennials and younger, there's a lot of this passive aggressive approach to dealing with situations. So you might hide behind a computer and, with all due respect, this, that, and the other, and, you know, I appreciate this and I appreciate that, but in the middle, it's all just lots of negative things.
Right.
And then the email comes back. So there's a lot of this back and forth without really getting to the root of the issue. So you might spend days dealing with something. But if you say what you mean and mean what you say, and you're coming from a place of looking at making things productive, you're not attacking the individual, that's going to build further trust. People will know that this person always is going to speak the truth to me. They're not going to hide behind, well, I think this is a great idea, but I'll get back to you. But you never get back to them. And they say this person always just rejects my ideas, and they always say they're going to get back to me. They love my idea, but nothing ever happens. When it comes to ideas and creativity, and you always want to hear people's perspectives. You and I both like to talk, right? we have that, the gift of the gab.
Yeah.
We like to speak. But you might find, and I don't know if you find this, but I find this a lot. You're sitting in a circle, 10, 12 people with you. All the people who love to talk are talking, sharing ideas. And all of a sudden, you stop and say, wow, Ismail over there hasn't said a single word. Ismail, what do you think? And within concise 10, 15 seconds, he has shared an idea, and all of you are like, wow, this makes so much sense. So as leaders, you have to know how to involve the people around you. If they're sitting at your table, there's a reason they're there. You've asked them to be there, you value their opinion. Then if you're not going to involve their opinion, because they're the type who's waiting to speak and, wait for their turn, and they don't want to interject because they're respectful, unlike us, we just keep interrupting each other. It might be that we have to understand how we're going to lead those around us. You have to be circumstantial. You have to understand the people you're with. So if those are not going to come forward, you have to reach out and get their opinions, ask for their opinions to speak, listen to them. And if they're valuable ideas, implement them so they can see that they're valued. Creating a list of amazing ideas, but then not acting on any of them, they're going to start to see my leader is always looking for ideas, asking for my input, but nothing ever gets done. So I'm just going to remain silent and stay out of it.
And you spoke about trust, and I think that's important when you speak about leadership, because I noticed, especially working under your leadership, that you give a lot of trust, and I think it's one of the ways that you empower your teams. Speak about, if you can, in a few words, of the importance of trust within high-performing team dynamics, and how the lack of it could be very detrimental.
Trust is the foundation of all relationships, work, personal, family life. If trust is eroded, things don't happen. And I find with teams, if you're going to recruit somebody into your team, bring them in, they've put them through the interview process, they've gone through their probation, they've demonstrated they have the ability. If you're not going to empower them, give them the autonomy, give them that leadership to say, I trust you to get this done, they have to lose that trust with you. So yes, you've given it, you've demonstrated, so has the person demonstrated they can deliver. Why would I not want to empower others to get involved? If I always want to do everything, it's not going to happen at the same capacity and level. If hundreds of people have been given that autonomy and that trust and that respect they all deserve to get things done.
Right.
And sometimes young people getting involved, when you ask yourself this, I'm just getting involved in my MSA and, nobody knows me yet. And you might find the MSA president says, hey, Eduardo, welcome. I'd love you to take on the social president or whatever. I don't even remember the titles now. It's so long ago. And you're a bit reluctant. Oh, this person doesn't even know me yet. Like, why are they trusting me with so much?
Right.
But they see you've taken initiative, you stepped forward, you've gotten involved. And now you feel a sense of ownership. You feel a sense of responsibility. You feel a sense of belonging. So now you are going to push yourself even further to try and achieve and learn and demonstrate that you can do this.
That's beautiful. One of the things that pops to my mind when I'm hearing you talk is one of my favorite movies. I don't know if you've seen it, Les Misérables. The story of Jean Valjean and how
I have.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I think to me that movie reminds me of my favorite definition of leadership, which is, a leader is someone who communicates people worth and potential so clearly that they get to see it in themselves and manifest the needed requirements in order to get there. And if you look at the story of Jean Valjean, it's basically like a thief who basically was blessed enough to receive an act of selfless kindness and generosity, and through that he saw something in himself as being worthy, and then from there he changed his whole life around. Even Malcolm X, if you think about it, like that's a lot to do with his own story, how the Nation of Islam approached him and said, hey, your life has value, you are a valuable human being, although everything around him indicated the contrary. When I think you're approached by someone who says, hey, like, I trust you to do better. Yeah. But sometimes it's difficult. Like, let's not kid ourselves. When people kind of don't deliver, don't show up, and they come short. Yeah. To which point do you think people should exercise patience and, try to constantly empower? Is this something that you think, you can talk a little bit about?
Yeah. Look, I may not be from the conventional mold of leadership, because I look at a lot of leadership from an angle of parenting. I can't fire my kids. They're my kids. They might do amazing things some days, and some days you're just like, man, I can't stand this. But can I fire my child? I can't. Yeah. What do? I work on developing them. I'm patient as much as I can. I try to involve other ideas, methods that they understand. So why should I not have that same mindset with the people who are driving towards the same direction that I am? Yes, they make mistakes. Yes, they may not get everything done the way you want. But why can't that patience be there to coach them and guide them? So leadership is a lot about working with the people around you, having the patience and the ability to get things done. Now, if they've completely become disenfranchised and they're just not involved anymore.
They went rogue.
They just went rogue. They don't want to be around, or they just don't care anymore. That's when you can sever the ties. But you have to have that patience and ability to work with the people that you've selected. Now, I personally feel most people have potential to continue developing. And I've experienced this. You experienced this. Many of the people you meet, you'll see them 5 years ago versus where they are now. They've developed. They've become better. So we have to know, some may develop fast, some may develop slower, but you have to be continuously driving that forward. We have to continue raising the ranks of the people around us. If we're not in that mindset, we're all going to be stagnant.
This is great, Mahmood. I really appreciate what you're sharing. I guess in closing, I'd like you maybe to share some books about leadership that you recommend. As we all know, the first commandment in Islam is iqra, to read. Right. And I don't know why we're not reading enough within our communities. And I feel like it's kind of weird, because we all love to go to the restaurant, right? Because the food is already prepared. Someone picked up the ingredients and kind of seasoned it, and the only thing we have to pay is for the convenience of having everything ready. And it's the same thing with books, right? Like, you already have these people who took the data and processed it into wisdom and knowledge, and for whatever reasons we're not reading enough. So I think it's good to remind people of the importance of reading. And I know you're an avid reader and you love reading.
I enjoy reading.
Yeah, and I know you always recommend great books, and you never recommended me a book I didn't like. So what book do you recommend on leadership, and why specifically these books?
Well, clearly you have good taste, so you like the books. But there's so many, but I'm going to stick to a few that if the viewers and the listeners can just even get one of them and go through it, right? So anything to increase yourself in knowledge, it can be from the blessings and from reward. Reading more Quran, then occupying your time to read some other things that'll make you better as a human being, as a leader, as a follower. A book that I really subscribe to and I ask people to read is Leaders Eat Last. And that is by Simon Sinek, to understand the importance of service and the importance of why you should serve those before you. Because if you're leading them, you have to also be ready to step back. So it's a great book. It's not a heavy read. It's a great inspirational read. And a book for our Muslim audiences who also want to understand some of the mindset and the leadership, emotional intelligence qualities of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is With the Heart in Mind. And that's by Mikhail Smith. You can find it online. It's a great book, short read, but some beautiful gems, because you see things you're doing in your day-to-day life. And if you can connect that to the leadership of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then every time you do that act and you think about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're also rewarded, right? So you can take inspiration from his footsteps. So it's a great book. And then you have a multitude of writers who speak about leadership. 7 Habits, 8 Habits, 7 Habits for Teenagers, if you're a younger listener. Stephen Covey.
Love him.
Great resources out there. So these are some things, but 2 books that I think, if you have the time, is Leaders Eat Last and With the Heart in Mind.
And that's emotional intelligence, basically.
That's right.
Okay. On the Prophet
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
So the author is a convert?
Yes.
Oh, mashallah. Interesting. And is it like a book you can easily get on Amazon?
You can get it through online, I believe, through Qalam Institute.
Okay.
They have it online. You can buy it through there. If you write the words With the Heart in Mind, it's going to show up. There's not too many other titles with the same name.
Amazing. Well, that concludes, I guess, our discussion. Thank you, Mahmood, for coming. It was a delightful experience to learn from you, and I took notes by having everything recorded. So
thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the amazing podcast you're putting out. I love the content that's coming. I'm taking a lot of learning from it, so keep it up.
Thank you, bro.
Take care, bro.
All right, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. If this video brought any value to you, please make sure that you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell icon so that you're the first one to know as soon as a video like this is uploaded to the channel. Until next time, guys, stay blessed and peace. Assalamu alaikum.